Alright, oxyacetylene cutting. The other side of the dual-purpose nature for the gas equipment is ability to cut as join metal. The gas torch can make short work with the cutting through even large, thick piece for the steel for sheet metal work with the probably continue with the use of the shear of the other hand tool with the cutting light gauge for the material, but being fake for the cutting through half-inch steel plate. With a hacksaw will easily convince you to value the cutting torch. 339 mufflers and installers can also be used with the welding rod to simulate length of the required bend of the pipe. The installed bent wire is taken over the hydraulic type 2 bender where a shape is duplicated in pipe. 340. Sometimes the oxyacetylene cutting torch fastest, easiest way to remove the old exhaust system. And also 314, the cutting torch is adjusted with a good flame, then check for the extra oxygen supply with the cutting of the level to depress the flame should be remained clove neutral. The excess oxygen was used to cut the pushing molten slag with the curve as you cut. The only oxygen cutting component different from the basic of the welding setup with the torch itself. The cutting torch is one major difference of welding torch. The extra oxygen supply over an operated lever instead of the valve. Actually, when you cut steel with a torch, it isn't the flame that is really doing the cutting. It's strong flow of oxygen that hits the heated part of the oxidation metal that helps the fast and effective of the air to disintegrate and disintegrate into flying particles. The basic principle of the oxyacetylene cutting with the torch that has several small holes surrounding the center of the large holes. The smaller outside of the hole, the basic oxyacetylene flame cuts out and actually serve several small flames. These flames are usually really use the preheat metal to be cut. The welder adjusts the gas with the oxygen flow with the torch with the proper flame with the preheat of the holes blaze the torch end with the piece of the cut. When the end is heated with the cherry red color, the welder presses down on the cutting lever which activates the strong flow of power and pure oxygen with the large center of the hole into the tip. This oxygen really cuts through the metal. Because of the oxyacetylene cutting involved a huge shower of sparks for the outside of the metal you're cutting must be prepared before cutting. Clear the area around the welding table to have the proper welding attire. Include the leather welding glove to make sure that the area around under the test piece is clear of any of the truck. The best support of the test piece with some fire brick, leaving the area under the cutting line open. If there is any restricted flow of sparks underneath the test piece, the molten shrapnel can also blow back in the welder's face. 342 is welding in the flame. Other cutting torch head should be adjusted to the neutral flame before cutting. Neutral flame, white core, outer flame, white core, outer flame. Make your cut line and sharpen the piece with the soap stand straight edge from the after making the cut line. Find the piece with the tube and the angle iron that you may clamp down to the work piece with the cutting guide with the torching head. Before you're cutting with the oxyacetylene torch, you should reset the regulators adjust the acetylene gas to 2.3 psi, oxygen to 15 to 25 psi. Since the larger percent of the oxygen will be used to process, select the gas pressure, tip side of the correlate with the thickness of the material that you are cutting. You set up the instructed tell you the recommended side for the brand of the equipment. Let your torch learn to do with the gas welding practical to watch the neutral flame with the preheat hold with the tip. Watching the flame pattern of the cutting with this extra oxygen flow for the cutting of the handle should affect the quality of the preheat flames. Place the torch flame at the edge of the material where you want to cut and hold it in a short distance from the material, 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch away. When the metal is cherry red about 1500 degrees, angle the torch to the tip back about 10 degrees. When the tipping and aiming the direction of the cut the oxygen. You will find that the oxygen cutting is much easier than learning welding process was. The main thing to learn here is the proper treble speed of the type of size of the gas pressure metal thickness you are working with. When you cut through the metal with the torch, you quality the cutting edge to tell you about much of the process. The bottom edge of the cut with the slag, maybe the cutting, electing, leaving the rough edge with the much that must be cleaned up by the green grinder later. Also remember that when you're cutting through the torch, alone take the material as to go. The part being removed is called the curve. When you draw soap lines to cut off the shape of the removing the outside of the line, your part will wind up being small. After having experimented a little with the torch, you have an idea of how the big curve will be certain tips of the certain materials. Alright, if you try to advance the torch too fast, the bottom of the curve may irregularly cut or not cut through all the way. You will look at the edge of the cut metal, but as you see the vertical edge of the cut with the good, but the cut these lines with the straight, smooth, the rough, the cut lines are always almost in the T-saw with the blade of the advance with the torch too fast. The cutting lines will look curved back toward the direction you started with the cut from instead of the straight up and down. See the illustration. All right, 343 show if the cutting torch should be held nearly vertical to the work when cutting the heavier metals. Angled back when cutting thinner materials like an exhaust pipe or sheet metal. Use scrap steels, tubing, or angled bracing in the guide with the torch for the steadier cutting. Right angle and then tilted back for cutting thin panel. 344. Examine the cut edge of the plate after you have used the cutting of the torch. The proper heat and travel speed where there is at least amount of slag around the bottom of the cut. This handheld cut was made with a little too fast. Evidence for the angle cut lines. All right. If you move too slowly, the torch at the top of the curve will be rounded off. The bottom edge will accumulate too much slag. And if you have someone else in the shop with you, have them observe the cutting from a safe distance when you are making good cuts. The shower of sparks should come straight down with the floor. You observe that it can tell with the spark flow going back toward the beginning of the cut. When indicate that the metal isn't being cut all the way after the torch is moved. The result will uncover the air with the bottom of the direction of the sparks back toward the beginning of the cut. Cause some of the sparks blob the cut. Could also get blown back in the face below. So learn to develop the right cutting speed for the cleaning cuts. You will find that the steadier you are with the cutting torch, the better the cuts will be. The half of the problem of the cutting defined with a comfortable position with your hand, since one hand is required to operate the cutting torch, and you can use the other hand or glove to steady the torch and help advance for the correcting along the cutting line, keeping the torch shaped at the same right distance for the work. The important the same find the piece of the angle iron tubing of your shop the size such that when you rest your torch on neck on it, it puts the tip on the right distance away from the piece of the sheet. Now the angle of the tubing lies on. Make and save the piece of as your torch rests, and it will be available to make straight and clean cuts. With that said, picture 345, clamp with the piece of the metal to work with the space of the cutting torch that had just been right distance to make the cutting line. The steadier the torch is held, the cleaner the cut. The travel is at the very steady speed. There are many different methods for the cutting on the steel of the product, like soft with the brace of the disc. They are versatile with the cutting torch. That if you can cut a piece of the 1-inch plate with the shape of an elephant, if you want to, irregular shape to cut out just as easily as straight lines. As far as the torch part goes, there who will have developed the rhythm, the smooth-handed movements for the torch. Follow your soap lines accurately with any aspect of welding. We will take practice. You can also stack the several pieces of the plate together, either to clamp them together with a tack weld the edges. When you cut, sizing the tip of the combined thickness, you can cut out many of the dozens of identical pieces of the type of to keep them truly identical necessary. The piece parts can later be tack welded, clamped, and bolted together with the final sanding, the grinding the edges, ensuring that they all match in the dimensions. Besides making straight cuts, which is easier, you may find that some projects require cutting certain shapes to be cut out more than once. Hence, varying cutting aids can be used. They can make the torch tip fill with a pattern of the same kind. That you can cut the filter the same the inch in the diameter. You make a steel or wooden pattern that has the circle with it in bigger than 6 inches. How much of the bigger than the 6 inches measurement depends on the size of the curve of the type of the tip of the usually using if knowing the need for the extra 3/8 inch to allow the curve to make the temple of 3/8 inch. Bigger than all around. When you may use the cutting of the guide, the rest of the torch you can cut out, use the many of the circles as you want, and they will be rounded the same side with the clamp of the template. Other workpiece for the moving the torch around that you cut. Always contact the temple. The smoother the template is, steadier your hand movement. The nicer the cut will be. Watching all the pro welders sometime will show you how to perfect you can and get with the seam the relatively crude method of making a part. Alright, in fabrication shops, special equipment is used to make the repeated cut shop shape of the lots of the parts and need of the basic machine that you would see the main street rods, race car shopper's flame cutter. Alright, 346. The tool you will see in the most race car of the hot rod flame fabrication shop, the mechanized torch, often called the flame cutter. Use the motor-driven torch to travel around. The template cut out the exact shapes. Templates are cannot temporarily ones cut with the even heavy cardboard and steel templates for frequent use. 347. The mechanized cutting setup with the Daytona and make use of the standard cutting torch to lay down the clamps in place and clamps in place. 348. The complete Daytona MIG shape cutting table is shown here with the erasable porcelain layout table holding the tape and take up less space when not being used. The table can be used with a gas torch or plasma cutter. Alright, mounting of the framework has a special torch with the straight cutting with the end instead of the 90-degree like most hand torches seen. See illustration. A series of the arms allow the torch to be stay perfectly vertical and yet move foul with any of the shape of the table. Top of the small electric motor there is placed at the top of the mount with the template usually made with a heavy guide with the shoe mail. A magnetized and curled tip at the top of the torch from the sump with the file of the template adjustable. The thickness of the material being cut, while below the torch tip the cut is exactly the shape of the template. Removing the human element from the torch mount means the flame cutter that can move smoother, more repairable parts. The most sharp the flame cutter is usually large behind it, and on which the hang of wide variety templates are frequently used in shape, such as suppression brackets, and in some shape the flame cutting set up with the panographic arrangement with the series of the arms make the torch cut out with the shape dictated with the movement of the stylus around the template with the table next to the flame cutter. Some sophisticated machines have electronic stylus for they will follow the lines for the blueprint, even the lead of on the pencil line drawn paper. Alright. 349. Whenever you find a flame cutter chanted there, you will find wall or metals templates nearby used by easily precisely duplicate common use shapes such as suspension mounting brackets or lower left in shape that used the head of the engine stand. 350. Most mechanized cutters have a drive head and mechanized tip following the metal templates inside and outside of the pattern with the cutting speed and infinitely variable suit the material. 351. The ESBA portograph can be used anywhere where they have source of electricity using cutting in the shape of a large steel plate that won't fit underneath stationary cutting machines. 352. The flame cutter with a swinging arm can be mounted over the plate and bolted on the table. 35. Under the mechanized cutting there, you need a grate like this and support the work while being cut. After some of the uses, 1/4 inch, 2-inch slats will be fairly cut up but can be pulled out of the swabbed enough and far, and then top of the bottom simply replace. If you decide to cut out shape of the oxysilicone torch, you probably need to build a cutting table on one straight cut with the end of the part to be laid over the edge of the bench for the blade. Working supported with the cut off the piece for just it. They fall off at the floor, cutting with the shape of the large within a few inches of beams. You need different surfaces to work on. You'll soon be cutting off into your bench. Look at it. Show the photo. Some of the cutting tables are pictured with it. You'll see how the construction one framework made from the holds long strips of 1/4 inch steel straps and at the edge of the position space and an inch of the two apart. The framework should be placed in some kind of fire container like an old drum, cyan blast to clean any of the flammable residue. For this will come out, capture flaming sparks and hot scrap pieces, and it keep the shop neater and safer than any other safe consideration. You are cutting away from the heavy part instead going in the fall into the right of your feet, and either they have the metal deflector under the cutting area, the keeping your feet away from them where the very hot part is going to fall. There will be times when you cannot start a cut at the outside edge of the workpiece when you will have to cut from the inside of the pattern. This requires a little different technique to get started. Adjust the torch at a neutral flame with the correct cutter lever to press. With the lever off, start heating on the spot with your workplace and along the cutting line until when the molten puddle starts to appear. Pull the tip back in about a half an inch and recover the closed spot. There is a chance that molten metal or spark being driven back into the tip if it is too close. Slowly cutting the cutter lever, in the cutting lever, when the spot becomes complete a hole, you can proceed around the rest of the pattern in the line. Some parts of the cutting of the torch need to have to be beveled edge if they are going to be joined with the part of the welding. As when we join section with the heavy pipe of the cutting, the beveled edge for the rounding pipe, the hand of the channels, and the pipe in the fitting industry, they often use machine clamps around the pipe. The fixture holds the current torch of the motor driven with an assembly around the pipe smoothly, evenly, and adjust the speed of the angle of the bevel. And there's no place for such any equipment anywhere with the pipe is with an inch of the speed of ways which human element hand control of the torch can be eliminated. Special equipment that when you do make beveled cuts, thicker metal of the torch should be remembered. The side of the torch to the tip of the measurement across the bevel, which the thicker than straight thickness of the metal. Heating and with oxysilane. And then that's the last of the chapter. Um, Heating with the oxyacetylene. You will be surprised how easily the piece of the heaviest steel can be bent into shape with properly heated with a torch. Even the thick piece of the steel, the heated to a cherry red color, can be bent like a sheet of soft copper. When bench vice will come in the very handy like this. The old time blacksmith hand shaped everything that made in the same way, except that they had heated in the part of the coal and wood fire, while they can do same thing in the second with the oxyacetylene torch. Depending on the thickness of the metal of the air to be helped bend, you can use a welding torch, cutting the torch to the heat up the workpiece, and it should take it up long to get the air cherry red. If it does, I'll use a large tip on the torch. Another type of the tip that can be used is called the Rosebud. It's especially designed for the heating. The oxyacetylene set for the deluxe model, but the set such a tip may be have included, but you can easily get one from the welding supply center. The Rosebud tip has a much larger end of the flow. For the huge amounts, you will have the crank to your end of the tank regulators, perhaps 25 psi on your oxygen, 10 psi on your acetylene. To feed the device, never exceed 15 psi of the acetylene regulator. The big wide flame of the Rosebud tip is the ideal, spreading heat with lots of it more evenly around the part of the tighter flame of the welding cutting the torch tip. Although those that can be used to heat the small areas, especially if you are in freeing frozen rusted fasteners. Alright, 354. The Rosebud tip will be useful in heating metals parts with the be bent with the freeing press fitted parts and preheating the casting before welding, and such as cast aluminum mailbox posts preheated before TIG welding. 355. A great guide with the cutting straight lines manually compass guide holds the torch tip firmly but swivels the arrangement allows the turn as you move along the line, and the torch stays in the same distance of work, much steadier than being demonstrated against another greater tool, magnesium magnet steel guide with a thick strongly working to save the hassle of setting up a bar of tube with some clamps. The most common use of the Rosebud tip is the heating the components that are press fitted together. The heating expands metal so logically. If you can heat the exterior part while not heating the interior part, the heat will expand and can be removed with the tongs. The most commonly done with the automotive industrial situation where there is gear pressed on a shaft and the axle being removed. Some of the situation, however, you cannot simply blast the area uncontrolled heat of the damage according to one of the components. You need only to apply much heat with it. Will take it separately, no part or no more. Your welding supply shop should be varying the painting marks, thicker than crayons, and designed to melt. Change colors and specific temperatures. Our brand called the Thermo Melt is available in 87 different temperature ratings from 100 to 2200 degrees Fahrenheit. A liquid stick or pellet form. Use product of the part you need to protect. Only the heat of the area that protect metals. Change colors working in separate components without adding unnecessary heat. These products are used in full and tampering tools that have been regrounded with which length subject to itself. Deciding which type of the welding equipment to buy without always a tough decision, but one that made it easy is careful defining that you need before buying the equipment. When you have read all the chapters in this book, you should have a good idea of the best benefits and drawbacks of each system and what is best suited for your work. Any other welder will tell you the versatility of the gas welding cutting setup becomes valuable when you need it. Even when most of the work is done with the same electrical welding equipment, you find that is so many handy uses of oxyacetylene equipment. And then if you budget, you can handle it, and you can have enough work to utilize. Then great idea to have the gas equipment, some of the electrical welder too. 356. The same tool can be used with different attachments to cut the perfect circle inside with a few inches of the 2 feet in diameter. Removing as much of the human element with the hand control makes the better parts, but they require less grinding to finish. Alright, notes, and then there's moving on to Chapter 4, Arc Welding.